the meeting to order. This is the April 22nd FinCom meeting. I'm going to begin by taking a roll. Dick Jamison.
Here.
Myself, Mary Hartman here. Christine Reynolds.
Here.
Andrea Zoll.
Here.
John Hickling.
Here.
Wade Rubenstein.
Here.
Brian Taylor. Brian, I see you.
Brian, you're on mute, Brian.
Just say here.
Hi,
Brian.
sorry, I'm here. Present.
Parashar Patel.
Here.
Ray Andrews.
Here.
Greg Gariello.
Here.
Phil Swain.
Here.
And that is all I see for FinCom members. I know some people couldn't make it tonight, but I'm hoping that Dean joins us since he is the observer to the middle school building committee. But I'm going to get started and hope that he joins us later. So good evening, John?
Sorry, I see that Dean is in the attendee category. Could he be possibly let in, or?
That would be nice.
There we go. There he is. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you. Great.
All right, here I am. Sorry. I could, there's nothing I could do. I couldn't get in.
That's okay, Dean. It's your first time. We understand.
Yeah, you got it.
Dean, say here so we know that you're
Here, I'm here.
Thank you. Okay. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for coming on such short notice. I called this meeting because the Middle School Building Committee voted at their meeting last Thursday a not to exceed budget of $108 million. The meeting was very long, and this vote happened at the end of the meeting. I observed the meeting together with other FinCom members, and I'm somewhat unsure of the reasons for the increase to the expected budget, but I believe they fell into two broad categories. The first was unanticipated escalation costs and community requests for more amenities. Our observer, Dean Banfield, did not participate in that discussion because that's the appropriate role of the FinCom observer. So tonight is our opportunity to discuss this increase to the expected budget. Please keep in mind that the project moves from feasibility to schematic design in May. So it's important that we have this discussion tonight. So the first order of business is correspondences. I think we've received about 24 more correspondence advocating for a larger gym or a larger auditorium or some combination of these. We have one letter from a resident who expresses some concern and some confusion about where the expected budget came from originally. Many of the letters are from parents who also articulated their willingness to pay more property taxes to get these incremental amenities. I believe that it's only natural that parents would want the best for their children, and sometimes that means spending money. But we need to keep in mind that at least 2/3 of Concord households don't have children in the schools. So the reason that the town is able to provide such well-funded educational facilities is really because 2/3 of the town subsidizes education for the other third. I want to believe that many parents understand this and realize that they are spending other people's money as well as their own. I also want to address a statement in one of the letters that urged us not to, quote, cheap out. I bring this up not to single out the author of that letter, because I think there are others that probably feel the same way. I've heard comments that we might be being penny wise and pound foolish. In response, I'd like to say, first of all, we're not talking about pennies. We're talking about millions of dollars. $8 million would go halfway towards building a new police facility that would benefit all people. More importantly, I believe that many parents and educators who appreciate the support that taxpayers are willing to give to the new school. I don't believe they think we're being cheap. I think a $100 million school is a huge ask, and most of the community is behind it. I believe this demonstrates an act of support, even generosity, towards education. Asking for fiscal restraint is not an indication that we are not grateful to the schools for all they do. I'd like to now talk bring it over to the discussion of the middle school. And I'm going to start by asking Dean to give us a little bit of background and some grounding on where the escalation figures are coming from, and also to give us a little bit of background on what he's learned by his analysis of some of the survey results as far as whether we can expect broad community support for an increased budget. So Dean, you want to take it away?
Thank you, Mary.
Dean, can I just step in real quick, Mary, and just say that
Yeah.
I'm going to, step out of the conversation for this point in time
Fine.
due to everything. I didn't want to interrupt your nice monologue there.
Thank you.
Okay. So just to segue from what Mary said, 2 meetings ago at the CMSBC, there were a set of survey results that were provided. The outpouring of interest in expanding the scope of the project to include larger spaces has been significant. And so the CMSBC went forward with, a broader outreach effort to try and really kind of gauge the understanding of how the community as a whole would respond to increasing the budget to expand the spaces. And to their credit, they've done everything possible to try to reach as broad a swath of the community as they could. And so if I could share my screen, I'm going to, here we go. I'm going to start with a little, here we go. Here we go. Okay, let me put that in. I'm hopeful that I can put that in slideshow mode so we can see this. Okay, I think that's enough. Okay, so sadly, if you minimize your view on the right-hand side so you don't see faces, you'll be able to see this slide. Otherwise, you're gonna, some of the more important things might be obscured on the right-hand side. Basically, the survey, they reached everyone they could possibly, every community group, everybody that they could touch, who could then forward the survey within their circle. However, just because of the basic interest that parents have, the large majority of people, basically 2/3 of the respondents were parents of children within the CPS CCHS system, and only about 1/3 were people who did not have kids in the system. So it shows a clear interest in it with that group of support for larger spaces and larger budget to build those larger spaces. Anything over 100 gained 56% in these raw totals from the survey group. However, if you, and I went to the town clerk to find out, what the breakout of households was between households with minor children and households with no minor children, and it was 70-30. And that's based on the Concord town census that was just concluded. If you weight these survey results and you give more emphasis to those and weight them at 2/3, the non-parent group at 2/3, and you weight the parent group at only 1/3, you see a modest, just a modest disinclination to actually increase the budget beyond 100 million. It shows that we are, we're teetering on the edge of something that may be a challenge at the ballot box. Just so moving forward. I don't know why my up-down arrows are not advancing. Let's try this.
Dean, can you slow down for can you go back to
Sure.
this for a minute?
Sure, I could. Yeah.
I just want to make sure that, so you're going to be talking about 2 things tonight. One is how you're interpreting the survey as far as the town's overall preference for a budget greater than 100 million, right?
Right. If you see
Yep.
if
So
you see
this slide
now,
right here, the takeaway is that it's right now, it's 53%.
would
No.
prefer a budget of 100 million or less,
Okay,
and 47% of the weighted totals would be okay with it exceeding $100 million.
Okay, and the weighted, these aren't the raw responses. This is you weighted it because the responses didn't mirror the population of the town.
That's correct.
Okay.
And frankly, the methodology that I use here is exactly the methodology that the town survey uses. The town survey uses a methodology where they bucket by age group. So in the town survey, people identify themselves by age. And so they create, I think, five groupings of 10-year breadth of age. And if people at 35 to 45 answer very few surveys for the town survey because they're busy, they're parents, they've got a lot on their plate, they don't answer the survey, but they represent a large number of people in the community, then the town survey is also weighted. So the results we see that we actually try to guide ourselves by in the town survey are weighted the same way that I'm weighting this. I'm doing the best I can here, given that this survey did not do age grading. It just said, are you a parent? Are you not a parent?
Okay.
So
Okay, let's slow down so before you move on to the next part of your presentation, which is looking at the escalation, let's
Yeah.
just stop and see if anybody has any questions on the committee for this particular, and I think Parashar, you do, right?
Yeah, so I'm not a statistician. So I don't know whether, did you simply just do the weighted average, if you will, of the scores to get to the weighted numbers on the right-hand side, or?
So, yeah, so to get to the numbers on the right-hand side, what I did was I looked at the number of non-parents. They represent a certain raw score. And
Right.
I weighted that raw score to become really in the case of my weighting, I did it 66. I'm sorry, what did I do it? I did it 66-34 because when I did the numbers that you see on this chart, these numbers were done before I got the results from Kari Tari, the town clerk, which actually would reflect a slightly different outcome. They would reflect 54-46.
I'm sorry, could you just walk me through the weighting for one row? Just
Okay, so for one row, what you have is you have say 204 parents who felt it was important to keep the cost under 100. Okay, and that group represents a specific percentage of the entire population, and it needs to represent 34% of the entire population.
not the 30% down below.
The only reason that 34 is different from 30 is because when I did this, Parshar, I did not have my results back from Kari. That just came in literally yesterday.
Okay, but just keep going
Mary
across.
counseled me not to change these numbers because I published these numbers to the middle school building committee when I calculated them.
Okay,
So anyway, so you take the fact that this is a certain percentage of the entire grouping, and you create a factor that reflects the fact that it ought to represent 34% of the entire grouping. I can send you the calculation. It's, it's not complicated, but it basically weights the parent group to reflect their ratio within the general population. Is that?
Steve, can you continue going across that row that you just
Sure.
said?
And so the non-parent group, 177, would then be weighted to represent 66% of the population, even though that total 486 only responded at 1/3 of this survey.
Got it.
So you create a ratio that basically expands that population to represent 66% of the survey. I can give you the underlying the underlying weighted results for each of these columns, and I'll be happy to distribute it. This is not rocket science what I did. I'm just telling you, it's quite straightforward. But
Okay.
in effect, what it's saying is that in the survey, for which the raw totals show a an inclination to spend more money, we have a high weighting for people who are a small sliver of the general population. So that's what the adjustment is trying to accomplish.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? from
Chris
the
has her hand up.
FinCom?
Yeah. Yeah.
Chris?
Yeah, so Dean, even without the weighting, if I look at this correct, it's certainly not, it's almost just split.
Well, it's 44-56. It's
Yeah.
pretty, but it is a mild inclination to spend more money.
Right,
Yeah.
but it's not an
Not
overwhelming
overwhelming,
support
no.
for greater
No,
than
it's not
100
overwhelming,
billion,
no.
right? It's not a mandate when I
No,
look at
it
that.
does not appear
Yeah.
to be a mandate, no.
Right, that's all I was
Exactly.
trying to get to. Thank you.
Yeah. Any more questions about this survey?
Dean, is 7%, it looks as though 7%, the survey represented 7% of the population. Is that considered adequate or statistically significant or?
I'm not a statistician at that level to be able to tell you what, you'd end up with a plus minus degree of certainty as to whether or not this is valid. That frankly, you're sending the survey out to a group of people who are not reflective to start with. It doesn't seem like you're going to get back information that's going to be instructive as to how the whole community feels. This is just trying to give you some sense that if the community had responded, it might look a little different than the way it did end up looking. That's the best, generalization you can make from this weighting idea that I applied. That's all. I don't want to put too much emphasis on it.
Dean, we have one question from the audience, and it's and you might know the answer. Where do the parents of children younger than elementary school fit in?
Well, the parents of children, the survey didn't really identify. It said if you're in 3rd grade or below, and then the break point was 4th grade and above. So I don't know how the survey actually identifies for parents who are have infant children or pre-kindergarten or pre-K. I honestly don't know the answer to that question. Some of those people could be in the non-parent cohort. It's quite possible they could be in the non-parent cohort.
Okay, great, thank you. Any other questions from the FinCom?
Sorry, Mary, I think on that very point, I think the data refers to just minor children and includes all children less than 18 years of age, and including students at private schools, and not just public schools, but including the private schools in town.
Okay, let me, there's 2 different data sets that you're talking about. So we're clear, John. The data set that represents 30% of households with minor children, okay, that is the town survey. And that you are correct about that. That represents children who are in private school, they're homeschooled, they're not in the system, they're doing alternatives, they're in another town, perhaps they're in a charter school. The DESI site is very explicit about where all those minor children are getting educated. There's a very good representation of that on the DESI website. But those 30% of households that have minor children don't really have, there's no real mapping to this survey. The survey just asked, do you have a child at 3rd grade in our system at 3rd grade and below, or 4th grade and above? And that was pretty much the break point. Those are the 2 break points. They wanted to identify those parents who just wouldn't really get any advantage out of the building at all, and those who would absolutely see a benefit from building this. So that was the only break point in the system. And then the alternative was, I don't have a child in the system.
Great,
Dean?
thank you. Any other?
Question.
Wade, you have-
So 7% of the overall population responded. Do we know what percentage of parents in the system responded with kids in the system?
No, I'm not. I don't know the answer to that.
Okay,
Not sure that anybody's done any calculations about that.
thank you.
Anyway,
Okay, good.
So that-
Thank you, Dean. You want to go on now to the
Yeah,
to the
sure.
next thing you're going to talk to us about?
yeah. So the next thing I wanted to talk to was one of the thoughts that has arisen around the idea of expanding the budget has to do with, well, we ought to expand the budget because it's been multiple years and we need to escalate because inflation, construction pressure, is underway. There's a lot of construction that may be underway or being bid. And so things are escalating and we need to be attendant to that. And we haven't really been careful about attending to our needs to escalate the budget. So I just wanted to kind of walk through how the budget gets escalated and what we do and just talk to that for just a minute. Let me see if I can get this going. Here we go. So just a few basic terms. The way this has been talked about since day one of the building project is by using unit costs in square feet. And there are two different ways unit costs get represented. I'm going to use one that is, we'll call it an all-in unit cost, an all-in dollars per square foot cost. There is a smaller number, which is what's called construction only. But you still have to build the building. You got to pay the architects. You got to put some contingency aside. You got to pay your OPM. There's a lot of soft costs, and usually those are built into the all-in number. So I use the all-in number in any of the slides you see coming forward. The scope of the building, basically, it's the gross square footage. We don't want to talk about net. Net square footage is what? Oh, we want to expand the gym by 1,000 net square feet. There's overheads. You got to build hallways. You got to build walls. You got closets, whatever. So we talk about gross square feet as the scope of the building. Escalation is the concept of trying to predict the future. So if our net square footage cost for 1 square foot today is 500 a square foot, and we have 10% annual escalation, and we want to build this building next year, or we're going to go out to bid next year, then we better plan for $550 a square foot. That is how escalation is applied. It's applied by predicting the future, adjusting for that, and building that into your budget. Okay, so that's how escalation works. So when we were represented at town meeting, the scope of the building was 125,000 gross square feet. It had a unit cost of $648 per square foot. That's the all-in style cost. To build it that year in 2019. If we're going to build it in 2019, that's what it would have cost. But we would have to do all the work to get to the bid point, and to bid it out would have taken 2 years. So we built in an escalation factor of 6.93%. And that's how we got to our number, 90 million plus. It's actually somewhere around 92 million. If you really run the numbers, you end up around 92 million. So the delay costs, if we were to delay more, if say the vote had failed at town meeting, we had to come back a year later, we're represented as 2.5 to 7.5 million per year of delay. So we could add that on top of the 90 that we already are talking about because we are delaying more. So that was a concern. And the budget was set with those thoughts in mind by the building committee at a range of 80 to 100 million. Okay. So come to today. Today, if we were to build the same scope that was advertised at town meeting, and we use the unit cost that is precisely estimated today by Hill, SMMA, all the professionals in the room they're staking themselves on this number. We're using 694, and that is already estimating what it's going to cost to go to bid in June of 23. June of 23, they are expecting the all-in cost to be $694 a square foot. And the 3 years are already in, 3.5 actually, because we've already gone through 2 years since the 2019 town meeting, and we've got another 1.5 years to go to get to June of 2023 when we bid it. So the 3.5 years are in the unit cost. And if we built that building that was promoted at town meeting, 125,000 square feet, it would cost $86,700,000. So well within the budget that had been set by the CMSBC between 80 and 100. And the actual escalation that we see, because the original number promoted at town meeting was 648, it's only risen to 694. And that's a future number expected in June of 23. So it's only risen like $45. It's not a lot of money. So that's only 1.97% per year. It's well below the estimated range, which was 2.7 to 8.3. And those are the dollars per square foot that we are working with today. Okay, so everybody's clear. That escalation is built in. We're all done with the escalating. This is the current status. The building that is currently on the table has expanded the scope to 143,000 square feet. The unit cost is this unit cost that we're working with, $694 a square foot. And that building is at 99.2. That's where we are before we talk about a new auditorium or a new gymnasium or a larger gymnasium. So the current plan to expand any cost or any budget cannot be explained by using escalation as a tool for explaining why we're expanding the budget. If we want to expand the budget, it's because we want to go back to the well and just expand the budget for increased scope. That's the only way that you can really explain why we're going forward with more money. So here are the three numbers. Town meeting, $90 million. It added some escalation that didn't really occur. Because if we built that same building now and bid it out when we go to bid it out, it would only be 86.7, not as much as they had expected it to escalate. But we've expanded the scope, and so the building is now at 99.2. That's the end of my conversation. That's the end of my discussion. Are there any questions about that?
Hey, Dean, it's Wade. Can you just talk about the scope change? I mean, it was really driven by kind of academic decisions, correct?
Yes.
The scope change is I would say 90+%. It's more than 90% driven by academic requests. The original scope that the town meeting looked at was we'll call it a default MSBA educational building with a 350 seat auditorium and approximately a 10,000 square foot gym. So it had a default educational environment that the MSBA would approve with no questions, and added those two spaces that we as a community would have demanded. So the original town meeting, 125,000 square foot space, had the things that we're now talking about, but the education ideas have come in to expand the scope to 143, and we don't have those elements. So that's where we are.
You have a question from Parashar.
Parshar.
Dean, thanks for the analysis. This is kind of helpful. I guess I kind of view the scope comparison here using square foot as probably not appropriate. It goes a little bit to what Wade said. You know, I'm in healthcare, and I kind of think if you're using scope and the analogy for scope is square footage, you know, it's like basically saying an image, whether it's an X-ray or MRI, are kind of the same. And I guess they're not. And I guess, you know, I'm wondering to what extent either you or Mary, I don't know if it's appropriate now to maybe ask somebody from the school building committee, but when we talk about the scope change, right, what else was done? Because part of scope and the cost, I'm assuming, is not just the square footage, but also does it also include the way the building was configured, what else they're planning on putting in, et cetera? Because this is not just construction costs, it's all in cost, right, for everything. So I guess I kind of view this summary as a little bit difficult for me to take and compare and say, you know, the scope just measured by square footage across these three areas is the same. I guess is sort of a little bit my reaction to this.
You know, I don't want to step on the toes of the building committee, frankly. I'll do the best I can in trying to give you some sense of that. Okay. The main way in which the MSBA controls a project is through what they start out with as is called a space summary. So the MSBA has a big table of if you plug in what type of school you have and how many students are in the school. And that spreadsheet comes back and says, to do that, you need a cafeteria that's this size. You can have a media center that's this big. You can have a gymnasium that's this big. You can have this many classrooms. They can be between 850 and 950 square feet. You can have this many science classrooms. So it basically gives you a breakdown of a school that they feel is adequate to get the job done. You can teach in this school and children will learn. Concord took that sheet and they added a variety of different educational spaces that were not on the sheet, that were not, or that were allocated differently on the sheet. And as a result, where we are is a 143,000 square foot building. Now, we do have two pieces in this building that are not part of that have been explicitly called out and modified from the basic default of an MSBA middle school. One is a middle school always includes a cafetorium, a multi-purpose room, which can be converted over and used as an auditorium by just putting seats in it, take the tables out and go. You have a stage at the end of your cafeteria, and that's a multi-purpose thing. They do not include an auditorium in that worksheet that creates the space summary that you would use. So that's something that the 143,000 does include, but it's at a smaller scale than the community is asking for. And it is even at a smaller scale than the original scope at 125 in town that was shown at town meeting had indicated was part of it. Okay, so that scope at 125 did indicate a 350 seat auditorium. We're now at a 270 seat auditorium within the 143. The 125 also included about a 10,000 square foot gym. The MSBA only allows you to have a 6,000 square foot gym, but the 143 that we have includes a 7,000 square foot gym. So there have been some, some things added to the two spaces that are currently in tension, but the other space is space that was requested by the educators. So we have more classrooms than in total than the MSBA will allow. We have a lot of open spaces that the MSBA has no place in their spreadsheet for. We have a lot of spaces that are not necessarily on their sheet, and Concord's educators have requested those.
Thank you, and that's helpful summary. And so in a sense, the comparison between 1434 and 125, even aside from the square footage, I guess in my perspective, is a little bit of an apples to oranges perspective. That's my perspective.
Any other questions from the Finance Committee?
So I have a question, if I may. I'd be very interested to know everyone else's opinion on this.
I can take this down so we can all see the rest of how about that?
No, keep this up,
You want
please.
this up? Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, we'll see. Go ahead, John.
Well, no, Dean, thank you for pointing out, without scope and with scope and some of the factors that made up those scope changes, because it just seems to me that the entire narrative recently has been with respect to the gym and the auditorium. And yet what this is saying to me is that there were many, many decisions, probably hundreds or thousands, that had to do with other issues, as you point out, academic issues, classroom size and multi-purpose rooms and other things that are not, that are not in the current narrative and discussion that we're having with respect to the cost overruns of the school. It's been framed, the narrative has been framed as one of only the auditorium and the gym. So it sort of leads me to wonder whether we should not look at some of these scope changes, or maybe perhaps more accurately, they should look at some of these scope changes And I mean, I guess the purpose of a budget is to make some difficult decisions based on economics. And so yeah, so that's sort of what this highlights to me. It's a rather narrow narrative that's been framed.
Well, let me just be clear. The main reason I put this summary together was because there was even in the FAQ that was sent out by Carrie, at the very first paragraph, it seemed to say, oh, we should be able to add to the budget because we should escalate. And the fact of the matter is, no, we shouldn't really escalate. We're currently estimating that when we go to bid, that the dollars per square foot are going to be $694. And so that's what we're expecting it to cost when we go to bid. And this is what you can get for your money, but it's not, because there's been a 6 or 8 or 10% annual escalation that you can apply. You really can't apply that. The 694 is the number. That's the dollars per square foot number that it's going to cost to build when we go to bid.
Well, it's interesting. We were talking about 8% cost escalation 2 years ago, and a lot has changed in the last 2 years. And in the most recent year, I can certainly see how many materials, copper and aluminum and petroleum products and everything have just skyrocketed. So I would think that would only accelerate that trend from that point.
Well, this is the number that the professionals have they've been working with this since February, and they're on this number. This is the number they're using. So I'm not going to argue with them. I'm not in that field. I don't make those estimates. This is the estimated number that is currently the one that's the working number that's creating our project cost number. Like the 99.2 is the current number without expanding the gym or the auditorium. That's the number we're expecting to be able to bring the building in at right now.
Dean?
Yeah.
Can we just go back to the escalator for just a quick second, just so I'm clear on this. So town meeting, it's 6 point, no. I like that. Can you go back to the other? No, go back. Yeah. So the 6.93 per year, just leave that one there. The 6.93 per year times 2 years, that escalator is what bumped that 6.93. Is that what bumped it up to 694? Because the math generally makes sense that way. If you're bumping up, if you're using that escalator at 6.93, you apply that to the 648, it gives you about 692, 693.
Okay, so let me tell you how that escalator works. The building that you would have built at town meeting in what was called at the time the 2019-2020 bid cycle, that building would have been 125,000 square feet at 648 per square foot. When you multiply those two numbers, the building would have cost $81 million. Okay, but because we were going to town meeting and we knew it would take 2 years, it would probably take 10 months to do the feasibility and schematic design. It would take another month or so to get us through a town meeting and then a ballot vote. And then it would take 13 months to do construction bid documents so we could go out to bid. So it's about a 2-year cycle to go from start to out to bid. So they said, it's going to take us 2 years to get there. They multiplied 81 million times 6.93 per year for 2 years. And yet and the number is about 92 million.
Okay.
So that's why
I think, Brian, Dean, I think what Brian's asking is the 694 number that you're using without the scope changes and the current status, that's 694. That wasn't simply using this escalator here. No. It was the number from the professionals. Is that?
This is the number that the professionals today are estimating will be how this project will end up being when it goes to bid.
Okay, I'm tracking with you, Dean, on that. But my underlying question is, it went from sort of 2 years to 3 years. The 3 years are in the unit cost. Was there any rationale? We kind of voted it in on, or there was a vote in it for 2 years. Now there's sort of the professionals are basically saying we're estimating it's going to be 3 years.
3.5, really.
3.5 years. So does that change? Do they just kind of decide on, 3 years, 5 years? It's a well-informed number, but I'm just saying.
Okay, so let me tell you how that number 3.5, let me tell you how 3.5 has been arrived at. We've already got 2 years under, that water is under the bridge at this point, 2 years, okay? So we're now looking at going out to bid in about 1.5 years.
Okay.
Okay, so we will be out to bid 3.5 years from when town meeting was occurring. That's approximate, right, at this point. It's about 3.5 years from when town meeting occurred.
Okay.
So 2 of those are already in the rear view mirror, and we have 1.5 years to go. And the professionals are currently estimating that in 1.5 years, when we go out to bid, that the project will end up being bid at about $694 a square foot.
Okay.
So that number is not an escalating number. That's just a number. And
Okay.
that number is what they expect it to be. So
Okay.
we're not just applying some percentage expecting something to happen. We're studying the trends and saying this is the number. So and because that turns out to be 3.5 years, if you back calculate how much escalation has occurred since 648 till 1.5 years from now, you end up with 1.96% per year. It's not a very large amount of escalation has occurred.
No, thanks for that. I just wanted to make sure I was clear on it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, Kathy has a question. Kathy?
We were just talking a short time back about what's in the current public narrative. And I am new to this. I keep saying that, but it's still my first year. The question I don't understand is why we're not talking about the fact that the town had decided to forego applying for approximately 30 million in state funding for this project. I mean, that's insane.
Well,
I
to
mean,
answer
that's a
that,
third of this
answer that
project.
question,
No,
that
I
was-
think at the time, the thought was, and this is what we debated 2 years ago when we agreed to go with the 1.5 million for the feasibility. I think the town knew that it was very unlikely that we would get MSBA funding, that it was likely that we would have to fund this ourselves. And we also knew that the longer we waited, the more it was going to cost us in capital costs to keep the 2 middle schools running. So it's a great question, Kathy. It's just, we kind of had this debate when we were talking about the feasibility study, and the town agreed that, yes, we'll go ahead knowing full well that we would not get that.
But if we went down parallel paths, we would already be 2 years into the process of, I mean, I don't know. I'm a coupon cutter.
Yeah, Kathy, that, as Mary said, I think the school committee and everyone else sort of discussed to what extent you could do the parallel paths, et cetera. And I remember the decision that ultimately it's just better to go down this path. I think we tried 2 years, right, in a row, or 2 times.
Yes, we did. We did.
And so
But
it wasn't in the cards, I think.
That's right. But one thing that I don't think I knew back then when I realized that we weren't going to get MSBA funding was that we also weren't going to get MSBA oversight. So having MSBA funding gives you some oversight as far as what is allowed for square footage for certain things. And we don't have that. So right now, we don't have the oversight that would come with the state funds.
So there would have been another kind of quality control or modulating.
There would have been some fiscal restraint, some fiscal oversight that we don't really have right now.
Thank you for the history lesson. I regret it as a taxpayer, but that's okay.
Well, actually, Lori Hunter in the Q&A pointed out we've applied 4 times for funding and been rejected.
Even while we're doing this project, we are continuing to apply, but we're being rejected each time. So.
Wow.
I have a question. Mary?
Yeah, go ahead, Andrew, go ahead. I'm reading.
So I'm a little fuzzy on where you go from 125 is 1,000 square feet to 143, the current status. You mentioned something about that increase is academic. Am I correct in assuming that this whole discussion this past year about enlarging the gym, the auditorium, whatever, is irrelevant to the 143, and the increase is a strictly academic square footage?
So Andrea, to answer that question, the answer is it is basically academic requests from the administration and the teachers to serve the students in this way that they expect to do. We did start with an idea that we were just doing an MSBA, like 6,000 square foot gym and a cafetorium. And we made some adjustments to allow the building to have a modest increase in the gym, only 1,000 square feet, and to add a single class level auditorium at 270 capacity, which is smaller even than the current Sanborn. Those are not MSBA fundable expansions. So, and are they driven by academic need? They are. Having an auditorium could clearly be identifiable as an educational benefit for the educational program that we run. Kids have a lot of musical opportunity within the middle school, and performance is a key element of that. And so to have a proper auditorium could certainly be identifiable as an educational need. The expanded gym was done because we could find 1,000 square feet and not exceed the 100 million cap.
Dean, excuse me, Dean, earlier you said that the 125 plan included a 350 seat auditorium and a 10,000 square foot gym.
That's correct.
And the trade-off that the building committee made was to reduce that to a 7,000 square foot gym and a 270 seat auditorium and provide additional classroom space and other amenities for the academics. So they did make that trade-off between the size of the auditorium and the size of the gym in favor of, given a budget not to exceed $100 million, in favor of those academic considerations. That's my understanding.
That is a way of looking at it. To go back to, because there was a question on the Q&A that was asked, and I'll answer it live. The original source of the 125 was a report done in 2017 by a firm called Feingold Alexander, which studied the condition of Peabody and Sanborn. And they came back with a set of alternatives. How much would it cost to renovate? How much would it cost to maintain these buildings and keep going with them? How much would it cost to do an ad reno to Sanborn and just expand it and shut down Peabody? There were a variety of options on the table in that report in May of 2017. There were two primary options offered for a full replacement. One was what we'll call a default MSBA space building. That's about 115,000 square feet is a default MSBA building. It has a cafetorium and a 6,000 square foot gym. Feingold Alexander pretty much knew that Concord would not want something like that. So that was called option 3A in the Feingold Alexander report. In option 3B was offered, and they thought that might be a more preferable option for the town because we have a 350 seat auditorium already at Sanborn. And they put in a 350 seat auditorium and approximately a 10,000 square foot gym. Please don't quote me on that because I'd have to go back to that 2017 report to know exactly, but I think it's a 10,000 square foot gym. And they put those in, and the additional square footage turned out to be something like 16,000 square feet, came up to 126 and changed, 126,4XX. I don't know the exact numbers, but it's something like that. And so that was called option 3B because it had those expanded amenities. And that was what was used as the way in which the town meeting scope was identified. You know, that was the town meeting scope that was offered, was the 3B option. But the underlying academic spaces were default MSBA spaces, which our administration and teachers would prefer to have more of. So that's really where the push is right now in the budget is that the way we'd like to teach requires more space than the Feingold Alexander original report had identified.
Hey, Mary, can I just ask one question? Because all this scope stuff has got me a little confused on. So let me just make sure we're clear. The 99.2 million includes the additional scope changes because of the academics. It incorporates the adjustments that were made to adding an auditorium and gyms. However, the last few weeks, we've actually seen a request by a number of parents to expand the size of the auditorium and expand the gym, in which case it would be 99.2 million plus some other amount for the two expansions. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you very much.
That-
And then just one other question for you, Mary, process-wise,
Yep.
like, what's your goal today? Because
Yep. Good idea. Good
Yeah,
idea.
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. The purpose of these slides that Dean just put up for us was to basically show that any increase from the expected 100 million up to 108 million cannot be explained by escalation of construction costs. That's, I believe, that's my takeaway from this analysis, is that the vote to go up to 108 during the conversation that I listened to was predicated on two things. One was community requests for a bigger gym and or bigger auditorium and escalation costs. And this, I think, shows that it's a false premise to think that escalation costs justify an increase over the 100. So what I'm hoping to get today is I'm hoping to get the Finance Committee to approve me writing a letter on behalf of the Finance Committee to the members of the Middle School Building Committee, copying the Select Board, asking for a revisit of that vote.
Mary, I'm a little confused on these numbers because I see Lori Hunter in the Q&A with the number of $555 per square foot. Can I get some
Clarify that.
clarification on that?
I can clarify that.
Yeah, Dean,
Yeah.
can you see that?
Let me look at I haven't really been watching the Q&A entirely, but to clarify that, $555 a square foot is a metric called construction cost. It's the cost of the steel and the concrete. It's the cost of the sheetrock and the carpeting. That's the cost of labor to build the building. 694 is what's called a fully loaded cost, or it's construction costs plus what are known as soft costs. That is usually upgraded by 25%. Soft costs include contingency, they include architect fees, they include the cost of having an OPM oversee the whole project. So that set of additional costs, which are not formally associated with physically building the building, the soft costs are added on as 25 additional percent. And if you multiply 555 times 1.25, you're at 694.
Thank you.
And also the 694 wasn't used at 2019. The 648 was used in 2019.
That's correct.
Right.
And Mary, and Dean, do you know, so the 99.2 million is current scope, and you're saying to get to 108, folks are saying it's because of two reasons. There's escalation and the cost of an expanded gym and an auditorium.
Right.
Yeah, okay, so that 8 million delta, how much of it is for the expansion and how much can be attributed to the escalation?
Well, that's
can't-
unclear because, like I said, the vote was taken at the end of a very long meeting, and there really wasn't a lot of clarity around how that extra 8 million was going to be allocated.
Can
So
I just
again,
ask,
it was a not to exceed, it's a not to exceed number, okay? But I think that if any of that number that is attributed to escalation costs is not valid. That's my opinion.
can I just get a clarifying comment from Dean, or perhaps Mary, you might know this as well. So a couple of weeks ago, we had a review of a couple of different, scenarios around how big the gym would be, how big the auditorium would be. I just want to get clarification around the 143,000 square foot scheme. Like, does the 143,000 represent the 2 basketball courts, the expanded auditorium? Like, which scheme are we talking about here? Because I'm not entirely clear. There were a couple of different schemes, or maybe even a third scheme. I just really want to understand what this represents. And
okay, the two.
Excuse me, to Brian's point, and people have talked about expanded auditorium, but it's actually a shrunken auditorium when you add the 2 schools together. 270 is less. It will not accommodate
Right.
both
Okay.
all the students and the parents or whatever. It's actually smaller. So it's not really expanded. That just to,
Yes,
at least
okay.
in my mind, I can't understand those numbers.
That's a great point, Andrea. But I think I want to get back to Brian's point, which is, Brian, when we were talking about the 100 million last time we met, right? That included an auditorium for 270, which Andrea points out is smaller than we had before. And Dean, what was the size of the gym at that point?
7,000 net square feet.
Okay, 7,000. That's what was coming in at 100 million. And what Dean is just showing here for illustration, okay, this is not what the committee voted on, but this is just for illustration, which is what it would cost with the escalation that we know of now. So in other words, he's just showing this as an illustration. The 100 million that we were talking about a couple of weeks ago on March 25th when we spoke was the 270 seat auditorium, the 7,000 square foot gym, and the full ed plan that the educators wanted to have for the.
But does that but is that description 143,000 square feet?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
You get a 270 seat auditorium and a 7,000 square foot gym.
And just so I'm clear, does a 7,000 square foot gym mean 1 basketball court or 2 basketball courts? Like what? Okay. I just want to understand what I remember looking at.
I'll tell you what it represents. A 6,000 square foot gym has a main court which is about 74 feet long. The 7,000 square foot court the gym that we're specifying now has a main court which is 84 feet long. That is the same size as a high school court, 84 feet long and 50 feet wide. So the main court will be larger because you have that extra 1,000 square feet to work with, and you have nice runouts and you have places for the sport people to sit. You have that extra 1,000 square feet. The cross courts in that scenario are quite modest. I think they're like 36 feet wide, and they may be somewhere in the vicinity of 65 feet long. I haven't kept track of those because I just haven't. But they're not standard by any means. They're very they're small. You can practice on them, but the practices are even narrow. You know, the everything is shrunken. So it's not an ideal set of cross courts by a long shot. So there but you can certainly get cross courts, but
no, that's fine. I'm just trying to get a reference point on the story that we've been kind of walking down this path, and we get all of these inputs, but these inputs keep changing, and I'm just trying to get a baseline on what we know, where we're going, and what we need to do. So thank you.
So, but Brian, to be clear what Dean described, the letters we've gotten want to expand on both fronts, and that 99.2 million and the 143 doesn't include the additional expansion of the basketball courts and the auditorium, which the letter writers are seeking.
Wait, I need to clarify something. Right now, the 143,000 square feet is coming in at 100.
No, it's coming in at 99.2, Mary. It's
Okay.
coming in. at the
Oh, it
number.
is coming in. Okay, sorry,
Coming in
sorry.
this
I
number.
stand corrected.
Yep.
And
this-
so Dean, sorry, Dean, is it correct that the 143 has one full-size basketball court and a
Yep.
270-seat auditorium?
Yes.
Okay,
We do have a question from Pat asking, Dean, and you said you're going to answer this live, or did
I
you?
already, I answered it in type and I also answered it live, but basically she's looking for where did the expanded basketball courts and expanded 350 seat auditorium fit into the 125, and that was in the 2017 Feingold Alexander report, option 3B. I can get you the reference if you need any more detail about page and chapter and verse.
Okay.
Sorry,
Okay.
Mary, can I just make one last point? We're all being drawn into this same, narrative that it's all about the gym and the auditorium. Why aren't we asking about the impact, the cumulative impact of all of the scope changes that went into the costs that got us to this current situation? I think we have to
We
discuss both.
We
can.
can.
We certainly can.
Yeah,
We certainly can. We can. So, does anybody have any more questions for Dean as far as these numbers go? I'm trying to get a sense for right now from the committee. Dean, you want to take down your slide, please?
No
Thank
problem.
you. I'm trying to get a sense now from the committee as far as what is your reaction to this? My reaction is that, to me, I feel like, again, it's not, escalation does not justify a $8 million increase in the expected budget. It really does come down to more space. And it could be that we can find and I'm not sure the community would, I'm not sure, I'm a little bit skeptical about the community's appetite to pay for all this more space, and if there might be an opportunity to find it elsewhere. So that's my feeling, and I'm wondering if someone else would like to add or contradict me, contradict me. Parashar.
So again, I go back to the question I asked, and maybe Lori or someone else can answer this, because I think, so the 99.2 is 99.2. I think everybody agrees that it is the recommendation that the teachers and the school committee and others came up with, meeting the academic needs of the students. For me, the question now is, okay, what was discussed at town meeting and the guidelines, to me, it's a little bit irrelevant, not totally, but things have changed. They've actually gone through the process of determining what we need, and so now we're at 99.2. I kind of accept that for a minute. I guess the question I really have is the up to 8 million. I don't get fixated on it's now 108. I'd like to better understand the thought process and specifically the breakout between what is the estimate for the incremental changes in the auditorium and the gym to get, if that's the direction we want to go. And then how much does that leave out of the 108 up to? And I don't know, again, if Lori or someone else can just help answer that question. Because if it's a $2 million increase attributable to those two changes and $6 million for escalation, I think it's a different story versus if it was reversed. Do you see what I'm saying?
I do. And I think that this is something that the middle school building committee is going to be wrestling with, which is what combinations of different size gyms or different size auditoriums do they feel that they can justify or that they can advocate for?
Well, I'm going to push back on that, on that question, because I don't know how one, and I wasn't there at the committee, but if you're at 99.2 and then you ask for going up to 108, there must be some estimate that was done for those two. So,
Parashar, it was at an end of a very, very long meeting.
so
Okay.
it was a swag?
Yes, it was
Oh.
a swag. It was a
There you
swag,
go.
and it was broadly
Fair enough.
reasoned that there were two elements of it, and no one really had the time or the energy left to
Okay.
decide how much is escalation and how much is a gym and how much is an auditorium. So it was kind of a swag. I
Okay.
think what I'm trying to do tonight is debunk the idea that it's due to escalation. Okay, and understand that it really does come down to other needs, and are there other ways that we could find that? And I will also, well, maybe I should stop there. So does anybody have anything else that they would like to add to that? Christine?
Yeah, so I appreciate Dean in particular, the work that you did, because it really helped clarify for me, because I observed that meeting and I in my gut, could not get to the 108 that the committee was just, that the middle school building committee was discussing. So now I understand, I think, how they got their number, and also how you came up with, I think, a better number to explain what's really going on with escalation. So thank you for that. I think for me, in the role of the finance committee, I think our job, I think the middle school has done their job. The building committee has done their job is to figure out what do they want for a school. And that's not my job, that's their job. But our job is to think about what's affordable. And I think we have been thinking about that. And I think we have, and we met with the building committee, I think a couple of weeks ago, and at their request, I think, or Mary's, I can't remember who it was, but anyway, it was a very good discussion, I think, where we talked about what are the considerations we have. And I think we sent them a pretty good consensus that from an affordability perspective, we were concerned at going over the 100 million. And I don't see a change in that. I understand, the constituents that are looking for additional amenities in the building, but I don't know why other trade-offs cannot be made. Obviously, as Dean explained, during the process, they made their priorities clear, and that was on the academic side. So if that was the decision, that was the decision, I guess. And that, I'm okay with that if that's where they are. To come back and say we want it to be not to exceed 108, if it's a false premise due to escalation because it was late and perhaps the math wasn't as well understood, I think it's fair to ask them to go back and look at that again. And if there aren't trade-offs, if for some reason there can't be any further trade-offs, then my request would be, and I think we said this at the meeting, to look for other sources of funding.
Yeah.
And they could be, the town, there are other ways we might be able to get this thing done if it becomes, if it's a critical need for the town. That's my thinking.
I appreciate that. While you're at that, some of the things that we brought up before were, as far as other ways of funding this that would not be borne on the backs of taxpayers, would be to look for private funding, look for the monetization of the Peabody School site. And the other thing that we've thought about, and I have to give Henry Dane credit for this idea, is that there is, the school has estimated that there's going to be about $548,000 of savings, operational savings, when they consolidate the two buildings. And if that $548,000 was diverted to debt service, that would go a long way to helping us pay for some of the debt service on the bonds that we're going to have to raise. So we've got $548,000 that the school has basically told us we're going to save. We could use that, and that could help us raise some or pay for some of the debt service. So that's another thing that we might want to think about and we might want to recommend. So with that, I'll open. I think I saw some other hands. Did I see some other hands? Yes, Andrea.
I basically agree with what you say, what you're saying, Mary. I have a problem with a, I don't know how to say it, a wish, we do not have that 540 or whatever $1,000. There's no guarantee that we're going to have it. Who knows what's going to happen? Construction costs. I mean, we're dealing with construction costs, and personally, and who knows? We've had a really weird year with all kinds of materials being stuck on container ships for months on end. I've seen it in my business. I'm sure everybody has. When this is all over, the costs could change. They could go down. I'm afraid to okay the top when things could go down, optimistically speaking. I also think, I know we're not really focusing on correspondence, so I won't say too much about it, but I appreciate the latest letter that was just forwarded that I did read this afternoon or this evening from somebody who has been involved in town business for, God, I don't know how long. I've known it for years and years and years. A very even-handed, clear explanation of what happened, what was approved at town meeting originally, and the thought that the loudest voices are not going to bear the burden of paying these taxes. And yes, a few $100s a year to numerous people, even though their address may be Concord, Massachusetts, can be a tremendous difference in whether they can live in Concord, whether they can live comfortably at all. I think there's a large portion, and those are the quiet, those are not the loud voices. Those are the ones we do not hear from, but they do have to pay taxes in order to stay here. And my concern is that whole segment of the population is really going to get lost because we may approve or give our voice or approval to some dollar amount up here. And when it actually happens, it's, oops, we didn't figure on enough parking spaces, and oops, we need to level this, or I don't know, unexpected soft costs. And it goes higher even. This is, you know, I'm going to be 76. I'm not one of the kids here in town, and I plan to stay in my house, hopefully. I'm going to have to be paying for all that. I've had customers, I've been in business almost 36 years. I've had so many customers who have come to town, built big houses, or moved into big houses, and made it very clear when they've come in, we're here for the academics. We want our kids to go to the best schools. They're not here for the biggest gym, or they're here for the academics, and then they're moving. They're not going to stay and pay for the school. I heard it when the high school was being built. These people are not paying for what the long-term residents of Concord are going to be paying for. So I'm really concerned about going to this 108, or I think we ought to really, like you said, Mary, get a better explanation of why this escalation, and think about the original 80 million. And I know we in Concord wanted more and bigger and better, but now it's 108. And I don't remember starting a project where I said, oh yeah, this is my top dollar. And then I come near the end and say, we've got to add this and we've got to add that, and it's more money. And at that point, you don't say no because you're almost done. So that's it. I've said my piece.
Thank you, Andrew. Did somebody else have something that they wanted to say? Ray? Ray? You're on mute, Ray.
Excuse me. Yes, thank you. Yeah, it's amazing work, Dean. Thank you for all that information and making it relevant, making it understandable. I looked at the sheet that was passed out by Terry, and looking at the 3 different financing options, the 30-year seemed like just sort of kicking the can down the road. And I think we're going to have, whether it's police station or whatever, that's going to need funds long before 30 years is up. So I really focused on the 20-year financing. And it looks like if it's at 1.8, it's going to be what, 7.9% increase in property taxes for taxpayers. And that's a huge hit. And of course, as other people have said, it's a huge hit for, especially hard hit for people who are not in the high income bracket, people who are on fixed income, or who are people for whom workforce housing is desired and so forth. Yeah, I'd like to see some way. Is there any way to monetize, or even create a range for how much we could monetize Peabody for, to again to reduce the debt service? I think it's a lot of money, and yes, that's some way to offload some of that to reduce that.
Anybody else? Thank you, Ray. Kathy, you want?
Yeah, I just want to second the your comment about asking that they relook at this. I do think that as a finance committee, our role is to ask people to be as fiscally responsible as possible. And so staying within a budget and trying to look at all the options of modifications. So again, tonight I heard that there were other things that went into the building footprint other than the gym and the auditorium that may have taken up space. And therefore, this is why we have the footprint that we have today. So to say that the only way you can get these larger footprints in the gym and the auditorium is to spend more money, I think we should be asking the school committee to find other ways. And I love the fact of an offset revenue from the Peabody School, and holding people accountable. If they make assertions that there will be money coming, then the town should somehow budget that and look for that money. So
Thank you.
that's my CFO.
It's your CFO hat. Anybody else have anything that they'd like to say?
I'll offer a comment. The town has been working with a $100 million number. And the work that I just presented indicates that when the town voted for 90 million plus, and we unilaterally at the building committee decided, though that really kind of means a range of 80 to 100, that the 100 became the top end, but it's not justified at all by the escalations that we are observing. The escalations have not materialized. And so even the 90 is actually something that the building that was presented at town meeting could be built for 86, because the escalations that were proposed at town meeting did not materialize. And so to just accept 100 as, oh, that's the budget, and now think about going higher, to me, is really kind of violating the vote that was taken by the community at town meeting, because we cannot justify this much larger number because of anticipated escalation. It just hasn't materialized. So we need to really think about what we voted for. And if we're going to find places to put these additional spaces, at a minimum, it should be done within the 100 that we've already been working with.
Okay.
Very good.
Arthur.
Can I just make a comment and then a question for you?
Sure.
Dean, I appreciate the estimate at the town meeting, but I think you clearly explained that there was one set of parameters and scope that was envisioned back then. And because of input along the way from the teachers and others, rightfully or wrongfully, the school committee arrived at the current scope, which is now 99.2. And so in my mind, what the estimate and the thinking back then has evolved to get to 99.2, rightfully or wrongfully. And so for me, I'm not necessarily sort of looking back at that and saying, well, we've got to build a school at 86 because that was a scope back then.
No, I wasn't suggesting that we should be building an $86 million.
Okay, fair enough.
I'm saying that if we've kind of slid into 100, that sliding past 100 to me is a bridge too far.
Yeah, no, that's fair, and that's fine. And this goes to actually that's relevant to the question I'm about to ask Mary, is and the reason I'm asking this about the school committee process, the building committee process, is I think for me, it's relevant as to when the FinCom weighs in. And I'm kind of curious, this meeting where they took the vote to no more than 108, is that like the final vote, or is the sense that the building committee and the consultants are going to go back and kind of figure out, instead of the swag, Mary, they're going to come in and say, well, this is the options we're going to go with, or we recommend, which is this size gym and this size auditorium. And then that's going to say, well, that estimate is 4 million, and therefore now it's 99.2 plus 4 million. And when does that occur? When does it stop? I guess is what I'm asking.
Okay, I don't know. Okay, I don't know what the middle school's building committee is going to do. Going back to what Christine said earlier, our job is to let them know what we think is affordable and to give them that signal. And hopefully they'll hear us. And hopefully whatever they do, whatever their next steps are, will be hopefully different based on the input that we're giving them. But how they're going to allocate or I don't know. We're not the middle school building committee. We're the finance committee, and we can let them know our thoughts. And I'm hoping that I'm proposing that I write a letter on behalf of the finance committee, which asks them to revisit that in light of the fact that the escalation cost, I think, is a false premise, and that any other community needs could possibly be found with the currently planned space, and also to give them recommendations of ideas of other ways that they could fund this besides taxpayers, besides a tax burden, including monetizing Peabody, including the savings that they hope to get by consolidating. So this is, that's what I'm proposing. John.
Sorry, Ray, you were in the queue before me. Please go ahead, sir.
John, you're a gentleman too. Yeah, the question is, are we supposed to be I didn't mean anything special by that two part, by the way, that was just a comment. Are we supposed to be an education? I mean, should we be putting a letter to the editor? Is your letter to the public? I mean, if it's a narrative about the escalation being a big contributor here, and Dean has clearly shown that's not the case, is that something that should be entered into the public narrative more broadly, and maybe get the focus down to it is just the bigger gym and the bigger auditorium? Thank you.
I think I'd rather wait and see how the middle school building committee responds, but I'm open to other suggestions.
I mean, I hadn't thought of that, but certainly we do, it sounds like we do want to have the greater public understanding what other options there are.
John, you have your hand up.
Yes, please. Madam Chair, I'd like to call the question and move that you write the letter that you propose.
Well, I need a motion.
Didn't I just move it?
Prove that.
We don't know what's going to be in the letter. That we probably ought to discuss what content, what we want the content.
I was hoping to get a motion to be a little bit more specific, but John, I can just write a letter. John, do you want to take a shot at being more specific as far as?
No.
Okay. Would someone else like to take a shot at?
I will, Mary. So
Thank you, Chris.
I move that Mary prepare a letter to the middle school building committee explaining that we would like them to relook at the premise for their vote around escalation, that we think using the information that Dean provided, that there's another way to look at it. And in fact, escalation does not require them to go to 108, something along those lines, Mary.
Okay.
Could we talk about including a clause that says, please try to find ways to satisfy the community need in a conservative manner within the $100 million cap, within the current 100 million. Can we add a clause like that? That's just, I'll put that on the table. I'm not saying that.
Here, I second.
Can I ask a question after Dean is finished with his?
Well, okay, I think point of order. I think what Dean is doing is basically amending a little bit Christine's motion, which Christine is saying revisit because of the we have a different way of looking at escalation, and then Dean is saying let's amend it to ask if they can also look at finding extra space in the current space plan, if I understand that correctly.
That's
right. Okay, and then we can discuss it, but. Okay, so that's an amendment to the motion. So now we've got an amended motion.
So we need to talk about that amendment. Do we add a clause like that? And we can vote on whether we want to add a clause like that.
We have a second for the
stay
clause.
on that. Let's stay on that clause. We'll close that out. If we vote against that clause, that's fine. But we need to close that out and then get back to Christine's main idea.
Okay, do we have a second on the amendment to Christine's? I hear a second. Let's have a vote, quick vote.
Anita's got a question.
Anita.
Mary, about 5 minutes ago, I'm just looking at my notes. This wasn't in the format of a motion, obviously, but you mentioned 3 things that you wanted to put in the letter. And quickly they forget, but you wanted to talk about the escalation costs based on a false premise. The second was what Dean had just said now, that the community requests that somehow they be incorporated into the space plan and the square foot cost estimate. And third was to consider seeking outside funding, such as monetizing Peabody, factoring in the operating cost savings into the long-term plan and other sources of funding. So that if this motion was going to address the 3 things that you suggested, they haven't talked about the third one yet.
Okay, thank you, Anita. Christine, do you want to withdraw yours
and redo it?
Okay, you're withdrawing your original. You're going to redo
I'll rescind my motion and I will redo it. Okay.
These 3 things.
These 3 things. One, the false premise regarding escalation. We would like them to relook at their vote on, looking at our analysis of escalation, A. B, we would like them to really look hard at achieving what they need to do in terms of hearing from the community within the 100 million. So stay within the 100 million, understanding you have to reallocate space, probably from an academic point of view. And thirdly, to explore other sources of funding besides taxpayers to fund additional requirements above the 100 million.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Second.
Great, good. I'm gonna go around and take a vote. John?
Do we have discussion on that?
Can
Oh,
we
yes,
can we
discussion.
discuss-
Sorry, I'm sorry. Discussion. Brian? Brian, you-
Just from a process, I don't fully understand. We're going to write this letter to the committee. I think it's a good thing, but I do, Ray's comments really resonated with me, and I really want to understand, like, what kind of teeth does this letter actually have? I mean, we're going to ask them to consider, and that's great, but we're having a discussion between, it's like we're having a discussion between two people, but it's impacting a larger audience. And so that larger audience, which has been voiced by a few people on the committee, isn't in the conversation. So shouldn't we be expanding the scope of this letter somehow to a broader audience so other points of contact can actually understand what the conversation's about? I'm just trying to understand, like, what are we trying to do? Because if we're basically saying, hey, I hope you take that, they could say, no, we like the 108.
Right.
We're moving on. Big deal, they're moving on. We don't have a say in that. So does this actually have some teeth in some form or fashion, or should we not only send a letter out just as a matter of courtesy and good process, but also send it more broadly to the town website, or I don't know, letter to the editor? Or I just want to ask the question.
Welcome to the power of the finance committee. It's the bully pulpit. That's all we got, is to just ask. All we can do is ask.
And that's fine, but let's just try to open it up to as many people as we can, just so we can get those voices heard. Because I think Andrea's comments resonated as well. It's like there are a lot of people in this town. Not everybody has kids in the school. This is $108 million we're talking about.
Yep.
Can the letter be also done as, there's a lot of people who don't go online to read the Concord Journal and everything, but there are a lot of people who read the paper. Can the letter be in the form of an op-ed kind of statement, or in addition to, of course, going to the committee? But I think, trying to reach more people with these questions and just raise the awareness even more might be helpful. It's still not going to, give the finance committee ultimate power, but it may actually, our opinion.
I think ultimately,
Yep.
this letter should stimulate a conversation in the community, right?
Yep,
That's
I
what
agree.
we're hoping for, not sort of an exchange between, will you hopefully do this? No, we won't do this. Okay, well, we're done.
Well, wait a minute. No, wait a minute. So the first part of that letter, I think, is about a factual discussion. And I think that is fair to be between finance committee and the school, the middle school building committee, because I think it was late and I don't think they had a lot of discussion about it. And I think it'd be helpful for them to see Dean's numbers without going to the public saying, hey, they voted on I don't feel great about that, to be honest with you.
But this is,
I mean, I do. So, and then the other points on stay at the 100 million and use other sources. I agree. That's more of a policy discussion of, look, we think there's ways you can do that. So I don't know if we have, one letter to the middle school building committee, and then we have a separate op-ed, and they're two different things. I think I'd like to give them some time to react to, hey, maybe the 108 wasn't calculated properly, because that was a pretty big
That's a big
discussion item, right? That's the whole thing, Brian, right?
yeah, and I appreciate that, Christine, but all of this is public forum. So this isn't a sort of a, giving them time. We're definitely going to give them time. We're as a courtesy basically saying we hope and we want to have this conversation with you because we're just raising some issues that you may not be aware of. And so that's fine, but why not invite more people into the conversation is my only point. Now, if you want to do that in two separate letters, okay. I just feel like we don't want to have a closed conversation, and I'll leave it at that.
Dean, have we done letters to the editor before from the chair? Kathy, I'll be right.
I have been asked in my tenure, I was asked to write one thing that was published in the paper, and I did. And I forgot, at this point, I've forgotten what it was about, but I know I did write one thing on behalf of the committee. I was trying to pull in somebody from the library. Oh, it was this piece about the library and how we were stealing money from the library. And I was asked to write a piece that ended up in the paper because we were not stealing money from the library. But I have a comment about the 3-point movement, that the motion that's on the table at the moment. And
Okay,
that is,
wait just a minute. Kathy's had her hand up.
okay.
Brian, I'm going to come back to your suggestion later after we get past. I'm going to try to separate out 2 letters. One would be to the middle school building committee, which is Christine's motion. And then I'll come back later to whether we want to do a letter in some other broader public.
a public.
Right. But Kathy, before Kathy had her hand up. So Kathy.
Okay, so my comments are this. I think we're all in agreement of sending Christine's message to the school committee. I'm in agreement with that. I think Brian brings up a very good point. I'm concerned that this is a huge expenditure and that there has been some publicity apparatus at play that has certainly stirred up a whole bunch of people that have sent poor Kerry dozens and dozens and dozens of letters, canned letters that people just put their names on or change a little bit. And we're not getting our fiduciary message out. It looks like, again, it's all in how one presents one's position. And I think that we are this committee takes its job very seriously, spends a lot of time. I mean, we spend hours and hours and hours. I've observed other committees, we spend more time than anybody else. I mean, maybe, I don't know, I'm not on the school committee. Maybe there are other committees but we spend a lot of time. We're very diligent in what we're doing. And I think that communicating to the community that we've looked at this and that, whether it's the last vote or the vote 2 years ago to go with, $90 million, I think we should let people know that we think, that we're thinking about our tax base and that there are other alternatives to this narrative of, whipping people up that they have to have a gym. So that's my long-winded way to say, I agree with Brian that we should have some other public communication.
I'm going to throw something out. How do people feel about including in the letter to the middle school building committee a request that the middle school buildings committee's communications subcommittee also have these types of messages going out as well?
That's a great idea.
I don't think the school committee is going to put our point of view out there.
Well, it's the middle school building committee, right? And it's supposed to represent the town. And so we could request that some of the messaging that they do would also include, for example, some of the things that they are getting from the school, as opposed to some of the things that we're not getting from the school, or some of the impacts to the taxpayers that this would be, to the median, some statistics around what it's going to cost people.
Well, let me ask you this, Mary. Are they the ones that have been putting out the narrative about the need for this override for the gym and the auditorium?
I don't know.
Does anybody know who's putting out, who's drumming up this narrative?
Well, the survey came from the committee. So
The survey came from, that's
filled
true.
out the options.
The
But I
survey
think
came from the committee, but we were getting the letters before then,
the
weren't we?
survey was responsive to the community outpouring of interest. So that's why the survey was created.
Dean, but
Yeah.
Dean, those letters were canned letters. It
Yep.
wasn't just like the community all of a sudden decided to write letters. Somebody said, write these letters.
Right.
Yeah.
So
But I don't know. I don't know the direct answer to your question, Kathy. It's a good question. I don't know the answer. Does anybody?
So Mary, I think you're taking, a very modulated tone. And my only comment to asking the school committee to do some discussion is that it's not coming from us.
Yeah.
Mary, I think that as the
one at a time,
finance committee, it needs to come, what we're talking about needs to come from us. Whatever the middle school committee, building committee does,
Okay,
that's their business.
I withdraw my suggestion. That's fine. That's fine. Okay, let's get back to what we were talking about. Dean, we're still discussing the motion that Chris made as far as the 3-point letter. And Dean, do you have something to say about that?
No, I just have a comment about the 3 points.
Yep.
The third point, which is asking the middle school building committee to find other sources of funding or to me, that's outside the scope of what they're being asked to do. I just personally feel that their charge is to go and design and get constructed a building. It's not to, find money. That's just not their charge. So to ask them to go find extra, figure out what to do with Peabody or become creative with the operating budget of the school, it's outside of their purview. And I would prefer not to see that in the letter. So I'm I guess I could make an amendment now to say, please strike that third item.
What if I worded it so that they recommend to the select board that we look at other ways of funding the building?
Well, we can recommend to the select board. We don't have to go through them to get the, it's just not their charter. That's not what they're about. So
But are we going to recommend to the select board? We can do that. We can have a separate letter to the select board.
We could do that. I'm happy to have us recommend to the select board that they study ways to find, because that's their purview is, raising the taxes.
Okay, how about in the letter, instead of recommending that we ask them to support other ways to,
Yeah,
that
would be fine.
Abstract enough word.
That's kind of more of an abstract thing. I just don't want them doing a lot of work trying to go figure out.
That's right. And I see what you're saying. It's not their job. Parasar.
Mary, how about telling them or informing them that we will ask the select board and asking their support?
Very good.
Thank you.
So I was going to make a similar comment to what Dean said on the third point.
Yep.
I think their job is to come up with the design and the cost, et cetera. And the financing is, in a sense, from my perspective, a little bit outside. I do want to go back to the first point, though, about, I think relooking at the premise of the escalation doesn't require the 108. We've used a lot of words that I'm personally uncomfortable with. Because if we want this to be a collegial dialogue and a conversation, which is, I think, what we said last year when we first invited them, from my perspective, everything I've heard today is at the end of a long meeting, they decided to say up to 108 million. It's a swag. There were two general reasons cited. One is escalation and the other is potential cafeteria gymnasium. We don't yet know how much of beyond the 99.2 they may or may not do. How much of it may be to escalation or maybe none of it, et cetera. And I feel like we're jumping the gun using words about like premise of escalation, et cetera. And frankly, I don't feel comfortable going there because it's almost a bit of a us and them mentality is the tone I've heard today. I understand maybe they don't have the estimates yet, and this is why I was asking about the process, is I'd feel more comfortable getting a better sense from their perspective of, hey, you went to 108, can you break it out and give us a little bit of a range there for the 2 or 3 reasons you've cited? And then let's have a conversation about what we think may or may not be right. So that's my feeling. The second bullet, I have no problems with. Of course, encouraging them to stay within the 100 million, make some trade-off choices. That's like motherhood and apple pie. But so those are my thoughts.
Any other comments? Phil?
Just on the issue of going public with this, as Parashar said, I don't think we want to make it confrontational. I think going public could turn it into a more confrontational situation. And the first step we should take is just a letter between these two entities. If they ignore it, or if they don't respond the way we want, we can talk about going public, but not yet.
And I would ask for information, Phil. Right? That's what I'm getting at. And it's already public. I mean, we've been at this for an hour and a half.
I have to counter this. Remember, on March 25th, both chairs of the middle school building committee came to our meeting, and each one of us gave our opinion about what we thought. And that was brought back by the chairs to the committee, and Pat Nelson gave them a debrief of what she heard, and she did a great job telling them what the finance committee said. And I think we pretty much said, we think you should stay within the 100 million, right? And yet we find out that a few weeks later, we have a vote not to exceed. So we've already been through this. We've already had the conversation. We already said what we thought. And in fact, they voted a not to exceed budget of 108. So I guess I'm wondering, plus in the interest of time, we've got hearings coming up pretty soon. So we're not going to have a lot of time to go back and forth. And it's really their job. I go back to what Christine said earlier. It's our job to say what we think is affordable, which is what we're saying here. And I think that's what we're saying in the letter. This is what we think is affordable. And here's why. And the fact that you've gone over that or didn't listen to what we were saying earlier, one of the reasons is not valid. So, I don't know how to, I don't know how many more times we're going to have this conversation, because in fact, we already did. So I'm getting a little bit impatient. Can you tell?
Doing fine.
So Mary, I would suggest you write the letter. I think that the second bullet point is really the critical bullet point, the do not exceed the $100 million. That was what the taxpayers kind of set as the threshold in 2019. And that's what we, as the finance committee, feel is, the number that we need to hold to. And where that, $8 million came from, they told us back in March, those budget estimates were kind of driven by square footage cost. They gave us the numbers back in March, the build cost. So whether it's escalation or whether it's, square footage cost, they kind of presented that back in March. It's immaterial. The $100 million is what is the threshold. And ultimately it's going to be for the taxpayers to decide at town meeting. If they move forward with that, then we know where we stand going into town meeting, and it's up to the taxpayers to make that decision.
That's a good point. That's it. Right. You're right. The second point, I think, is the important point. And arguing about whether escalation was calculated right might not be the best lead. John, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Mary, bit of a regression. To answer the question of where the form letters might have come from, I'm on the Concord Carlisle Youth Basketball website.
Yep.
And it says that the request of the design subcommittee, they sent out these petitions, as they called it. So sorry, just a clarifying point to an earlier discussion.
So it was at the request of the middle school building committee subcommittee?
Well, that's what their website says. So I can't attest to this. I'm just looking at the website and what it says. At the request of the design subcommittee. Is what it says.
What did they send out at the request of the design subcommittee? They sent out letters?
Well, it says there's a petition here, Dean. I haven't looked at the entire website.
Okay.
But tcybasketball.org, I think, will give you your answer to that question.
Okay.
Secondly, Mary, I agree with your point. I think we have signaled on several occasions our attempts to be collaborative. And I think we need a little reciprocity. So Parshar, I'm sorry to say I would disagree. And Mary, I would agree with your point.
We have a motion on the table for me to write a letter to the middle school building committee with 3 points. The first one being not the most important point, which is that we would calculate escalation differently. The second point being that we think we should hold to the 100 million and find if they decide they want more space to find it in the currently planned space. And then the third point was to support alternative ways of funding this building besides increases in property tax. I think I have a second.
Mary, just point of process for the
Yes.
chair. I thought Dean put an amendment for the third point, or was I?
No, he was amending Chris's original, which was
Okay.
just the first point. Thank you, Brian. I know we're getting a little bit off. We're getting lost here. This is the motion that's on the table. It was, this is Chris's motion. I think it was seconded. Anita, was it seconded? Anita, yeah, thank you. Okay, so I'm gonna,
Yes, it was seconded.
thank you. Okay,
by
I think
John.
we've got any more discussion? Ray,
Yeah, I think that we've already said, take the first point off, that, we don't want to create adversarial relations, and to take the third point off because it's not their domain. So it's really the second point is that we just want to stick to the 1 point or the 100 million, right?
no, that's not what I heard. What I heard is that the second point is the most important point.
Right.
That we would still keep the first, but it wouldn't be the most important point as I write the letter. And
Yeah,
then
okay, sure.
we would ask them to support alternate ways, but not for them to actually find them.
Right.
And then I'm going to follow up with after we take a vote and if this passes, we'll discuss writing a letter to the select board. Okay, so any more discussion? Okay, I'm going to go around and take a vote on authorizing me to craft this letter on behalf of the Finance Committee. Ray Andrews? You're on mute, Ray.
You guys thumb up.
Favor.
Thank you. Myself, Mary Hartman, yes. Dick Jameson?
Yes.
Christine Reynolds?
Yes.
Andrea Zoll?
Yes.
Wade Rubenstein?
Yes.
Dean Banfield?
Yes.
Parashar Patel?
No,
What?
no,
Okay. Phil Swain?
Yes.
Brian Taylor?
Yes.
Kathy Cuoccolo?
Yes.
John Hickling?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I believe that was 8 yeses and 1 no. Thank you. Now let's talk about, should I write a letter?
We have an abstention because Greg's really a member, but he's not doing anything.
That's true. We have 1 abstention, right? Okay, should I write a letter to the select board?
11 yes.
Yes. Yes, you should.
Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second,
what's the letter gonna say?
it's to ask the select board to seek other non-taxpayer leverage to fund this building.
Second.
Any discussion?
I just have a question.
Yep.
When we say, in principle, I like the idea, mind you, right, of going to alternative. But what power or authority does the select board have to do that? Are they empowered to start a charitable drive or go see, you see what I'm asking? Like, what are they gonna do?
I think that it would be their decision what to monetize the Peabody site or not.
Okay,
It would be their decision whether they want to in fact reallocate the savings that the school is anticipating from consolidating the buildings and use those funds and direct them to debt service, for
Yep.
example. We could recommend it, but
Okay.
it's their
so
decision.
can I just make an amendment that we actually put in a couple of those examples in the letter?
I will.
Okay, thank you.
I
'Cause
will.
we talked about going to other private sources for donations.
Yep.
And I don't know the select board can start that, but I like the 2 examples.
Yep.
Well, we could suggest they explore public-private partnership, which is another way of saying the same thing.
Fair enough.
Let me see, we have other, before we leave that though, it was the sale of the Peabody site, savings from redundant operating costs. The other thing that we have here is perhaps CPC funding for other project costs, private funding, gym rental revenue. I mean, these are just things that these are just ideas that we're giving them. It's really just, we're advising them. It's so.
Rec department collaborative efforts, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Right, right. So, yeah, so it would be basically a list. It would be some suggestions. So let me see. I've lost. Where are we? We have a first and a second.
Yeah.
Okay, Ray,
Yes, I'm in favor.
Mary Hartman, myself, yes. Dick Jameson,
Yes.
Christine Reynolds,
Yes.
Andrea Zoll,
Yes,
Wade Rubenstein,
Yes.
Dean Banfield,
Yes.
Parashar Patel,
Yes.
Phil Swain,
Yes.
Brian Taylor,
Yes.
Kathy Corpolo,
Yes,
John Hickling.
Yes.
It's unanimous except for Greg, who's abstaining, and the chair so declares. Should we talk about publishing something in the Concord Journal?
How about we wait the middle school building committee and see what kind of response their next meeting generates and what kind of discussion occurs there before we start blasting.
Go public? Brian, how does that feel to you?
I think that's fine. I just want to make sure it's very clear. I'm not in no way do I think we should be having any type of adversarial relationship with these folks. They've done a tremendous job. They're working as hard as anyone to do what's right for the town. I just want to make sure that the quiet voices in the town have an opportunity to just kind of weigh in here. And if we can stimulate a conversation with a broader audience, I think that's really what the spirit of this is. So if waiting and just kind of hearing what the reaction is the best course of action, I'm comfortable with that.
Kathy?
I'm sorry, who was it that said they found the letter correspondence on the
John.
basketball site?
It was John.
Yeah, Kathy, I was on the Concord Carlisle Youth Basketball website. So if you go to ccybasketball.org, you'll see the full description with a lot of detail and links to a petition. So I can't be 100% certain that is the source of where some of the communication come from, but it certainly appears to be so.
CC Youth Basketball.
ccybasketball, yes, .org.
Okay.
I tried to put a link in the chat, but in the Q&A, but I don't believe
That's
it
what I'm asking
worked.
for. Yeah, as I want to go there. But Mary, I'd like to have an opportunity to kind of look at, and I understand our wish to be collaborative. I'm concerned about the amount of time that we might have. And so I'd like to have the opportunity to look and see if I can't trace back some of this. I guess I'm concerned if there's a narrative to do a drumbeat to get all these letters supporting the extra money. I see our correspondence to be somehow a balancing or a point counterpoint kind of discussion to say, we, the finance committee, we have these views of alternative ways, and it's important to stay within budget for tax purposes. So I guess that's to say a maybe in terms of not going into the journal.
So Kathy, to be clear, I think, I agree with John. Look, the correspondence was generated by folks that are members of that organization, but I think it's also important to clarify that I don't think the school committee or the design subcommittee urged them to generate it. I think if you go to that website, it simply says, hey, the architect submitted some stuff. Go ahead and send your recommendations in to the design subcommittee to let them know how you feel about getting an expansion. So whether somebody underneath generated or not, to me, it's a little bit immaterial at the end of the day, because if they're residents of Concord, they have as much right as other people do to send in form letters or send in customized letters. They're making their voices heard. Folks that aren't making their voices heard, I understand they're not making their voices heard. Ultimately, people will make their voices heard at town meeting, frankly. And that, I think, is where the rubber hits the road, and we'll see what happens.
I think Parashar, we're trying to avoid a contentious town meeting, and I think we're trying all the work we're doing now And now I know you want to be collaborative, but I think a lot of the work that we're hammering out now will make a collaborative town meeting. I think that so it might feel uncomfortable now that we're being frank with each other and we're being direct with each other. But my hope is that by doing that now, when we go to town meeting, we will all be behind what is put in front of the town, and we won't have this contention, and we don't tear apart the town. So I think the work we're doing now is to avoid that, not to nurture that.
I agree with you, Mary. I just know that there is a portion of our constituency that wonders about the amount of money being spent. So, but that's my concern is.
The amount of
There's
money.
I have a suggestion or a question, Mary.
Yeah.
The FAQ that Carrie was putting, and I think that goes to the middle school building website. I think that's where that's going to go. So perhaps we could ask to have a page for us, that says, here's the finance committee's view on X, Y, and Z. And because they have the facts in there in terms of the tax rate, but they don't have, it's not an opinion piece. But I wonder if that might be a good place to put it. To me, if that's the place where the opinion pieces are going to be, here's the pluses, here's the minuses, and we could put we could say something there that says, yep, this is what the tax rate's going to be, but then there are also these other considerations, other projects in town, all the considerations that we gave to say, we think 100 million is enough. So that could be a place to do it without going to the paper. I agree with Phil, his earlier comment. I think the first letter should be between us and the middle school building committee, and then after that, see what you want to do, and whether it's FAQ with the building committee site or the paper, that's okay with me.
One thing I would appreciate is if the FAQ were to remove that first paragraph indicating that there's all this escalation that we need to consider.
Exactly. That's why it's important for us to get that clarified. I think that there really is a misunderstanding about it, Dean. There is.
Yeah, and again, I'm just going to make sure that we all keep in mind that this is the least expense ever.
Right.
For this town.
Right. And that's why I think we need, it is important what Mary said. It would be much better. Let's work out the differences now. It'd be much better for the school committee, the select board and finance committee to have consensus on whatever number we come up with and say, this is a good deal for the town. It's important.
I would suggest that when we reach the point, I've gone way over my 30 minutes of sitting, that we not wait too long. I still think being polite and subtle and being within FAQs and all of that is fine for a certain segment of the town, but to reach a broader section, I think something has to be in something like the journal, where it's easy for more people who are not behind computers, they're not looking on the websites, they're not looking at financial things, that I think the finance committees, and I've said this in past years too, only very quietly, I think where the finance committee stands and why needs to go out to the broader public of the town.
Okay. Let me make a recommendation. We meet again a week from tonight, which is the hearing, the first hearing we have, right? We've already agreed that we're going to stay after the hearing to vote our recommendations on the articles that have a financial impact to the town that were heard that night. So we're already having a meeting on the 29th. The middle school building committee will have a meeting on that morning, that Thursday morning. So how about we wait and see, and they will have had the letter. Let's wait and see how they react. And then we'll talk about next steps as far as, going to the Concord Journal, putting something on FAQ on their website, or and other ideas that we might come up with in the meantime, that might be a good time to talk about that then. What do people think?
Excellent suggestion.
I
Okay,
agree.
Yeah, Mary, I think that because of the town meeting this year being, again, the outdoor one-day session,
Yep.
we really need to educate the people even more than we would ordinarily, and not wait for town meeting to give the finance committee's approval or concern.
There's no
Be a quick meeting.
warrant article this year, so there's nothing in town meeting this year. This is just happening under the radar. This is not.
well, the reason we're talking about it now, as I said earlier, is because we're moving from the feasibility study into the schematic design. And once you're in the schematic design, it's very expensive to change it. So yes, Dean is right. We're not going to bring it to the vote for the town until the special town meeting, which I've heard December sometime, right? But we're making decisions now when we enter schematic design that are going to be, it's going to be hard to pull away from some of those. So that's why I asked for us to meet tonight. But let's wait and see what happens on Thursday morning, and let's take it from there. Is that okay? Okay, I'm going to open the meeting up now for public comment. If that's on our agenda. I think that's next on our agenda. Excuse me, I gotta find my agenda and then I'll know what's next. Next is the CFO report, but Carrie has told me she has no CFO report. So the next thing is citizen comment. So do we have any comments from the citizens? Any questions, comments from citizens that would like to speak now?
Got the Q&A and we've got Pat Nelson.
Pat, go ahead. Chris, is Pat muted?
Yeah, I was muted, but I couldn't find the mute button.
Great, hi Pat. Go.
Hi, Mary. I want to thank the committee for spending so much time on this and deliberating so carefully. I do want to emphasize that as a co-chair of the MSBC, I very much wanted this to be a collaborative process with the Finance Committee. And as part of that, I want to be sure that people understand that we are acting in the best interests of the town always as the MSBC. And so I will take one small item from this discussion and just I really want to clarify that it was not the Middle School Building Committee Design Committee that generated the large number of letters. I want to be really clear about that. That's the kind of sort of nugget that I know in Concord can spread around and become and get in the way of collaboration between committees. So if I could just throw that out at this late hour tonight. But again, I thank you for your time and your commitment to the town being on this committee. And I'm hoping that we can go forward and work out the best solution for the town. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. Chris, I don't see anybody else. Do you?
No.
Great. Okay, good. Okay. Thank you all for coming out at this late notice. I really appreciate it. I do.
Mary, I'm sorry. Henry Dane lowered his hand. Now he's raised it again.
Okay, Henry, you want to speak? Go ahead.
I just wanted to raise the two questions that I put into my comment. One was that I think that alternative sources of funding should be utilized regardless of what the total cost is. I think what Dean had said is those alternative sources should be used if the cost goes over 100 million. I think those alternative sources should be used even if it's 90 million or 95 or whatever, because it's 100 million is still a lot of money. And if we can find other sources to carry that tax burden, we should certainly look at them. The other item I wanted to address was the fact that the question was asked, what what authority the select board had with regard to these proceedings. And I think they have a great deal of authority and influence over this because they have a great deal of control over what goes to town meeting, which is where the ultimate vote on the bonding will take place. And they have a great deal of control over the process of issuing the bonds. And therefore, I think that they do have the ability to have a lot of influence over the issues that you have, I think, so carefully and sensitively analyzed tonight.
Thank you, Henry. Are there any other comments or questions? Chris, can you check for me?
There's no other hands raised, and I think you've reviewed all the Q&A.
Great, thank you very much.
Oh, I'm sorry, Pat Nelson has her hand back up.
Oh, okay, Pat?
It went down. Oh, she's
Went
back.
down.
Went down. Okay, she's
Okay.
messing with her thing. Okay. Okay, good. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion adjourned.
Second?
Second.
Okay, I'll go around. Ray Andrews?
Adjourn, yes.
Myself, Mary Hartman, yes. Kathy?
Yes.
John Hickling?
Yes.
Dick Jameson?
Yes.
Christine Reynolds?
Yes.
Andrea Zoll?
Yes.
Wade Rubenstein?
Yes.
Dean Banfield?
Yes.
Parashar Patel?
Yes.
Bill Swain?
Yes.
Brian Taylor?
Yes.
Greg?
Fine by me.
Okay. Thank you all again. I will see you next. I will copy you on the letters and I will see you next Thursday at the hearing. Have a good night.
Take care.
Thank
Good
you,
night.
Thank you, Mary, for all your hard work.
Thank you. Thank you, Kathy.